Welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world.
Today we're joined in studio by Sinead Mac Aodha. Sinead is the Director of Literature Ireland, an organisation aiming to promote Irish literature around the world. Sinead is joined by your host for today, Priscillia Charles.
So now let's move on and get on to the show. So Sinead, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm very curious. Can you take us through your background all the way to your current activities, please?
Well, I started with a degree in languages from UCD, French and Italian. And then I moved abroad. I spent some time in Italy, where I taught English as a foreign language. Initially, I was supposed to do a master's in 18th century drama, but it proved very complicated. And I made some good friends, and they found me a job teaching English. So I met lots of Italians who were very keen to learn English. And I suppose that sensitized me, in a sense, to the challenges of acquiring a language, of communicating in a different language, and all the nuances that are involved.
Okay, that's great.
So that was the beginning.
Yes, I imagine, yeah. But prior to this and prior to studying, what attracted you to why did you want to specialize in languages in the first place? Why did you want to start this degree in UCD?
I think it's probably my parents' fault. They moved to Connemara in Galway. It was the Irish language speaking part of the West Coast. And my father changed his name to Mac Aodha, my surname. And he spoke a lot of Irish. We had babysitters who spoke to me in Irish. In fact, I may actually have spoken Irish before I spoke English.
Wow.
When I was really very small. And my father also had a travel bug. He loved traveling. So he would take us on car journeys all around the country. And had a lot of foreign visitors. I have photographs of having dinner with a Japanese geographer when I was about
Fantastic.
3. So there was always this sense of language and travel being part of my upbringing.
Absolutely.
And then when I was 7, he decided he was going to spend a year in Spain.
Oh, wow.
So he bundled us all into a Ford Cortina, and we drove through England. Took a ferry from Southampton to Lisbon, and then into Spain, where we spent the best part of a year.
Wow.
And I got to go to school there for a few months. I have an 8-year-old Spanish. I turned 8 when I was in Spain, and I did learn a fair amount of Spanish, but at a very elementary level.
Mm-hmm.
So then we came back home, and I was in Irish language medium education for my primary schooling, and after that moved into secondary school with English language medium schooling for the most part, and I started French in school, kept up the Spanish until I was about 15, and then the wonder bug hit my father again. He was an academic and he had the opportunity to travel. Yeah. So he bundled what was then a family of 7 children into a Ford Transit and spent the best part of a year in Portugal. So I suppose it started then.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, you were almost a polyglot, like a good couple of languages before you started university. That's fantastic. So that's kind of what triggered this interest in, I understand, languages and then literature. I understand you must probably have read a good couple of books in different languages when you were studying in French or Italian, no?
Absolutely. Well, the degree I took in Italian in UCD required that you read a novel after the first term. So your holiday homework for the Christmas break was to read a novel. And I took it very seriously. I was very keen to learn Italian and to learn it well. So for that Christmas holiday, I spent every day a good chunk of time with my Italian-English dictionary.
Wow.
Working my way painstakingly through the novel, which was a contemporary novel, a lovely novel, Gli occhiali d'oro, by Bassani, but which wasn't that easy for a beginner.
Yes, it was. Oh, it's very impressive, huh? And
well, it's the same for all the students. I mean, that was what was required, and,
yes.
and the degree was good, and the lecturers weren't taking any nonsense. That was what was needed if you were to acquire the language.
Yes, if you wanted to
Hard
succeed,
work.
yes, absolutely. No, true. No, but I mean, I studied myself languages, and I don't remember being told to read an entire book after the first term. So, yeah, it's very impressive. So. Moving on to
which languages did you study?
I studied English, Spanish, and I did a bit of Russian.
Oh,
That was
lovely.
prior to my journalism studies, but I stopped this degree, I have to say. But I was very keen on continuing my English education and Spanish as well.
And now you're interviewing through the medium of English. So
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
Pretty fluent.
Yes, and I live in Ireland, so there you go. So to move on to your current position, you're the director of Literature Ireland, an organisation aiming to promote Irish literature around the world. And Literature Ireland was formerly known as Ireland Literature Exchange, and it helps to promote Irish writers and writing internationally. So can you tell us a little bit about the centre and the great work that's involved over there?
Well, the organisation was established in 1994. It was the vision, really, of a man who was on the Arts Council, a poet called Micheál O'Shiel, who had travelled particularly in Scandinavia and had seen that those countries promote their literature really effectively.
Mm-hmm.
They offer translation grants to foreign publishers. They host translators in their country. They try to develop a love and an interest in the language by placing students as language assistants in universities around the world. And they've been doing this for a long time. And in the Finnish case in particular, I think they started over 50 years ago promoting their Finnish literature through this method. And he felt that Ireland was at a disadvantage because so much of the writing in Ireland is in English, and it's often considered British, basically.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember being at the Frankfurt Book Fair many, many years ago and seeing a booklet produced by the British Council which included 2 or 3 Irish writers, and people like Colm Tobin being part of the British Council showcase. Now, at a certain level, that doesn't matter.
Yes.
But at another level,
Yes.
yes, it does matter because
Absolutely.
the inspiration and the language is from this country.
Mm-hmm.
So he pushed for some research to be carried out. Micheál O'Shiel pushed for some research to be carried out to see whether such an agency might work in Ireland. And he, through the Arts Council, commissioned a report which Michael Cronin, Jürgen Schneider and Liam McCole produced. And this helped make the case for the establishment of a new literature promotion agency. The Department of Foreign Affairs agreed to support it.
Wow.
The Irish Language Books Board agreed to support it. And of course, the Arts Council was a major agent in the development of this agency. So in 1994, the agency started. It was called, as you said, Ireland Literature Exchange. It was based in one room in Parnell Square.
Wow.
With one staff member. And in its first year of operations, in 94-95, it produced 12 books in translation.
The start.
It was really the very start. The very first book was translated, and you'd be pleased to hear this, Priscillia, into French.
Yes.
It was a book by Hubert Butler, and it was published in 1995, and that was the very first title.
Oh.
And things have changed a little since then. As you said, we've had a name change. We've become Literature Ireland, but we've also supported almost 2,000 works of Irish literature in translation.
Fantastic.
In 56 different languages. And we can't take all the credit because, of course, it's the publishing houses around the world that have done this.
Yes.
We've just helped. We're sort of midwives in producing these wonderful babies, these lovely books in translation.
But it is a lot of work, so that's great.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to think of people engaging with Irish literature and by extension with Ireland through our creative writing.
Absolutely.
But I do want to emphasise that without the publishers around the world who pay us the compliment of choosing to publish Irish literature, this wouldn't happen. And it's no mean feat. There's a risk involved. If you choose to publish a book in translation, you have added costs. You have to build the profile of the writer in a way that you wouldn't if it was a writer in your own country. You have the translation costs. You have additional editing costs. Even simple things like your choice of book jacket may not be that simple. I was looking at a book the other day that is due to come out in Tamil Nadu. And the depiction of a pastoral rural scene is completely wrong. It looks as if it's somewhere in New England rather than in rural Ireland.
Yes.
So there's so many things that can go wrong. It's no mean undertaking to publish a work in translation. And one of the lovely things about having an organisation like Literature Ireland is that we can intervene and help. We can help financially by supporting, to some degree, the translation costs. We can help in terms of advice with regard to particular nitty-gritty difficulties in the text itself. Yesterday morning I was helping a Japanese translator with some expressions that she hadn't come across before. Things that seem so simple to us, like a fiver here or there.
Yes.
That seems obvious to me or to you, but to somebody in Japan, what's a fiver and what does a fiver here or there mean? So it's lovely to have an agency that can actually make a difference and that can support translators and publishers around the world.
Yes, no, absolutely. No, this is fantastic. Those are words, phrases, common phrases that you'd only hear here, and that any of us non-native Irish speakers, just like me, would have learned here. So yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I understand that the organization is in a partnership with the Trinity Centre for Literature and Cultural Translation, which is part of Trinity College. Can you tell us about the partnership established? When was it established, and what is the goal?
Well, it started in a small way, as often the best projects do. We wanted to host literary translators in Ireland, and we started doing that in about 2003. But we were conscious that we were hosting translators and they were coming for very short periods of time. We couldn't really afford to have them for too long. And that although this was very beneficial to the translators concerned, that sometimes it would be nice to have somebody on a longer term residency so that they could be fully immersed in the culture for a season, for 3 or 4 months. And the idea behind the residency is that the translator would gain as much insight as possible to the culture, to the seasons, to the weather, to famous Irish rain, to the smell in the pub on a Friday night and the smell in the pub on the morning afterwards, and just to meet people, to meet the writer of the work they were translating where that was possible, to visit the locale of the work. But we really did feel that we weren't doing it as fully as we might had we had more resources. So we met with people from Trinity College, Sarah Smith, who was the Dean of the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultural Studies. And she loved the idea of co-hosting a translator in residence. And about 9 years ago, we initiated our very first joint translator in residence with Trinity. And that was a Russian translator who came and spent a good 4 months in Dublin. And we supported the translator in terms of taking him to the theatre, funding his per diems, meeting him regularly. And Trinity supported the lucky translator by offering him accommodation, by giving him access to all the facilities that Trinity has, and wonderful libraries, a student cohort, academics who were interested in what the MAM was doing, and so on. So it was a perfect marriage, and that was the beginning of our relationship with Trinity. And over time, the idea came to establish a Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation, and the provost was met. We met with the provost and proposed this initiative to him, And Sarah and I were very pleased to see that he was so receptive to the idea. And he set a task to somebody to identify a suitable building. And we viewed 3 different sites where we could possibly set up our joint offices, together with the Dalkey Archive Press, which was also interested in forming such a partnership. And eventually a building was earmarked where the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation is now based, with 2 key partners, Literature Ireland and the Dalkey Archive Press, as well as the master's students of literary translation. So it's a very clever partnership, and it's working well.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had on the show Michael Crellin, yes, who told us everything about the course. That was extremely interesting. So yeah, that absolutely makes sense, and it's fantastic that the partnership is here. So I saw that one of the last translator in residence program beneficiary was a Japanese lady. So I understand correctly?
Yes, we're hoping to welcome Hiroko Mikami to Dublin in February, and she's going to work on some translations of Tom Murphy's plays. And that's really exciting. It'll be our first Japanese translator in residence. She's a friend of Ireland. She's a well-established translator of Irish literature, and we're hoping to whet her appetite and invite her to undertake new projects as well.
Great. And do you have kind of an overview? Do you know, like, is it would you have kind of your mindset on a particular language every year, as in, like, after having a translator in residence that's from Japan, would you have someone from a different country, completely different part of the world?
We tend to focus on territories where we feel we could do better, or where we feel we need to have more contact and a greater profile. Obviously, that has meant in the past quite a number of Chinese translators. We've had people from Shanghai and from Beijing, of course, but also Chinese translators who are based in the States, and in one case a Chinese translator who was studying in Belgium.
Oh, wow.
But we're building a portfolio, if you like, of key contacts and people whom we hope will become ambassadors for Irish literature throughout their long careers.
Yes.
But it has changed over time. I mean, when we started the project initially, and I've been associated with it since the very beginning. I started work with the organisation in 2003, a long time ago. And in that first 12 months, we hosted a lot of translators from Eastern Europe because the wall had come down and there was a new hunger and a new interest in Western literature. And we wanted to show as much of the best of Irish literature as possible. Okay. So we invited a large number of Eastern European translators to come to Dublin. We had translators from Romania and Bulgaria and Latvia and Lithuania, Romania, Hungary. It was very exciting, very interesting, and they translated a whole range of materials, some contemporary, some more canonical. I remember having a Romanian translator who wanted to translate At Swim to Birds by Flann O'Brien, and he was struggling with certain key phrases in the text, and we were doing our best to help him, but we didn't have Flann O'Brien and Miles McGoplin to consult because man was dead. And there was one expression in particular which was and I think it was a surefire iron cast plunger, and we phoned people in the National Museum to ask if they knew what kind of plunger this was, and we Googled it, and Google was still relatively new at that time. We were trying different reference books, and on his very last day I invited Anthony Cronin, a contemporary of Flann O'Brien's, to lunch, and we all had lunch. It was all very pleasant, and as we came up the steps from the basement restaurant, I turned round to Tony. I said, "Tony, you don't know what a surefire iron cast plunger is?" He said, "Of course I do. It's a tip for a horse."
Oh God.
And so we solved the problem for translator. He's been tearing his hair out trying to work this problem out.
I can imagine. Wow.
So sometimes you can be very lucky, and sometimes the solution is under your nose, and at other times it's very obscure.
Wow. Oh, fantastic. It's great that you asked him.
Yes. He also had a difficulty with another expression, which was a pint of plain is your only man. This phrase that comes through in this lovely refrain that occurs as a leitmotif throughout the novel. And his problem there was that he just didn't have an equivalent.
In his own language.
A pint is a very particular measure, it conjures up different ideas of the container and the liquid that's in it, and the convivial atmosphere when men are drinking pints, or I suppose nowadays when women are, but it's certainly in that book when men are drinking pints. And eventually he found a solution. He found a tankard that miners used in his culture, and this term worked perfectly. It created all that atmosphere of the drink and the merriment.
Yes, I see. It is very peculiar, yes. I suppose that it wouldn't be the case in every culture, yes, in every language.
No, and I think translators are absolute heroes in the commitment and engagement they have when it comes to finding something that is
absolutely
an equivalent. It's never going to be the same, but it will give the idea.
Absolutely. Wow, very interesting. And so coming back to the organization itself, Literature Island recently launched its third series of authors entitled First Lines, that captured by the fantastic John Minahan that we had the privilege to meet recently, and who's famously photographed Samuel Beckett. So can you tell us a little bit about the idea behind the project, about launching this project?
Well, the idea was that we it's a little bit like marketing water. How do you promote an organization that helps support literature in translation? It's quite the challenge to render that tangible in any way. And we were also conscious that when we attend the major world book fairs, I mean, we do go every year to London and to Frankfurt and sometimes to Guadalajara, that people want to take something away. And yes, we can give them our beautiful catalogue, New Writing from Ireland, but that's not always going to strike a chord with them, because they will visit the Finnish stand and receive a Finnish catalogue, and they will visit the French stand and receive a French catalogue, and so on. So we wanted to do something different, and so we decided we'd commission postcards of a cross-section of contemporary Irish writers, and we asked the photographer Richard Gilligan to take some photographs of writers in their homes, in their workplaces, and wherever they tended to write.
Yes.
So that was the first series, and then we did a second series with Richard. They were very well received, and people still enjoy them. And then we thought, perhaps we'll change, and we'll ask John Minahan to do the next series. And one of the really attractive ideas there was that we suddenly had this very young generation of up-and-coming writers, particularly writers who specialise in the short story, men and women. There are so many good writers coming out of Ireland at the moment. It's very exciting. And we thought, we'll use this very established, very iconic photographer. So I asked John, would he take the photographs, and he sort of said, let me add it. I'd love to. And that was great. Wonderful. So John went around about 18 months ago and took photographs of a dozen of this new generation of writers. And then, just to make things a little bit different, we added the first lines of the writers' works on the verso on the other side here.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you think that there's a possibility that John captures 2019's up and coming Irish writers?
We're very confident that he will. We asked him would he consider doing another series, and he's agreed. So we're going to focus in the next series on women and on poets.
Brilliant.
So we're conscious that we've been focusing on prose writers, and that there are lots of good women poets around. I think we'll have to look after the men in the following series.
That's great. It's very exciting. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing this. So coming back to the event itself, the French ambassador Stéphane Crozat was present at the launch. And speaking of France, you've also had the position of managing director at the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris from 2016 to 2017. So I'm very curious, being from Paris myself, and having been to the centre for St. Patrick's Day. It was fantastic a couple of years ago. Can you tell us a bit about your role over there? What are you involved?
Well, yes, I was approached to see if I would be willing to go on sabbatical and take over the running of the centre for a year while the director was on maternity leave, and I jumped at the chance. As you know, I have a degree in French, and I'm very francophile. I love everything to do with France. I sit on the committee here in Ireland of the Franco-Irish Literature Festival and help programme it and moderate events, and I have a strong bond with everything French. So when the opportunity arose, I thought, goodness, what a wonderful chance to spend a year in Paris and to represent Irish culture in its broadest sense in this amazing setting. You said you've been there. It's a beautiful
neighborhood.
In the heart of the 5th arrondissement, around the corner from the Panthéon. With space for theatre performances, gallery performances, a Vistatec, and a beautiful old library upstairs with ancient manuscripts in it. So it's really got everything. So I set off not quite knowing what I was letting myself in for, and started programming for the year. One of them interesting developments, of course, challenging developments, I suppose, was that Brexit was becoming a reality, and both the French in Paris and the Irish in Paris wanted to know more about that. So I programmed a series of talks with journalists from Ireland, journalists from the Financial Times, and so on, just to talk about what that might mean for Ireland in general, and also for Irish culture, and for Irish-French relations.
Yes.
So that was really quite interesting and very topical, very current.
Yes, absolutely. I can imagine.
Then there's a beautiful chapel. The college was a seminary, so there's a chapel which has a beautiful acoustic and is very, very atmospheric, and we were allowed to program certain musical events there. And some of those were very special. I remember having Cullen McAnamara play to a spellbound audience. So generally speaking, it was a privilege. I was managing a team of a dozen committed, hardworking people, 11 of whom were French. And I had no experience of managing that number of people, and I certainly didn't have any experience of managing people from another culture. But we worked very well together, and it was a real highlight in my career to date.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. And talking about Ireland and the relationship, the cultural relationship between different countries with Ireland, how important to you is promoting Irish art and the Irish language abroad? I mean, not just, historic works, but publishing and distributes new writing from Ireland, for instance, and other publications.
I think I'll answer that question in two ways. I think promoting Irish literature is hugely important. I think there's a soft power attached to it. I think it's almost like an invitation card. Every time somebody picks up a book abroad in translation, they're opening up a beautiful Pandora's box, which is going to bond them with Ireland. It's a Trojan horse of the imagination, if you like. I think it's hugely important. At a wider level, you have politicians who can use Irish literature and translation as a form of soft power. I know we had a Prime Minister, Taoiseach, some years ago who went to China, and the first words the Chinese Premier said to him were, "I have read your Yeats." So that is quite the icebreaker, and it is a huge advantage for Irish politicians and for the Irish state to have Irish literature in translation. More specifically in relation to the Irish language, I think it's very important that Irish writing would be read abroad and read in translation. We've had a wonderful success story in recent years with Craigh Killa, this important novel from the 1940s, which is considered the most important novel in the Irish language. And a few years ago, it was translated into English not once but twice. An Irish language publisher had the rights to the book, and he commissioned one translation, and then he thought, you know what, I'll try a second translation. And he's a regular visitor to the Frankfurt Book Fair, and there he met Yale University people from Yale University Press, and they decided to publish both translations. So the novel was suddenly widely available in English. I think there was a review in the New York Times. Wow. It was a fascinating translation story, this idea of this almost forgotten Irish language novel that is suddenly on the world stage. But also there are people around the world who can speak Irish. I was at a conference recently, and the Czech translator of that novel gave a paper in Irish.
Wow.
And that novel has won a major translation prize in Prague. It was on national TV. It's long and slow work, and I think if we had greater resources, we would probably invite translators of that kind to spend more time in Ireland so that we could build a greater number of translators who are capable of translating directly. Mm-hmm. But even using a bridging language like English, I think it's wonderful to think that, for example, Craigh Killa will soon appear in Croatian, in Tamil, and is already in German and French and so on.
Wow, that's fantastic. And do you have any other project with Literature Ireland that you'd be working on and you'd like to share with our audience?
I have a couple. One of the more exciting ones at the moment is a translator workshop that we hope to organize in Beijing.
Wow.
Around about the time of the Beijing International Book Fair. And the thinking behind this is that we can't have 20 Chinese translators in Ireland every year, but we can certainly go to Beijing, bring some writers, bring the translators who have an interest in Irish literature, and have a workshop for a couple of days. And the Irish ambassador has offered us his reception room, so we're in safe hands in that sense. We've got a lovely space, and I'm really looking forward to it.
So it's very exciting. And when is that book fair?
That's in August 2019. And I said I had another project, and the other project is quite simply to encourage Korean publishers to translate more of Irish literature. I met people from the Korean Publishers Association recently, and they've invited us to their book fair. Because they're keen to have an international base, they very kindly invited us to come and take a stand for free, just to get a taste for what it's like, or for what the publishing scene is like in Korea.
Wow, that's great.
So it's a busy year ahead.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sinead. It was fantastic. Fantastic to spend time with you today, and very, very interesting.
It's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure as well. So that's the end of today's show with Sinead from Literature Ireland. Please tune in again to see our next VistaTalks show, where we'll be discussing more interesting discussions with interesting people from around the world.